Do you ever feel like retro games would be better if you got weird and turned them into wrong, unnatural, confusing abominations that the world isn't ready to see? Because I do. Hey there, how's it going? I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video today. Sometimes in life, it's fun to pretend. Like it's fun to pretend to be ghosts on Halloween, or pretend to be drunk Irish people on St. Patrick's Day, or pretend that we love our wife or girlfriend on Valentine's Day, or pretend that we're happy on National Be Happy or Go to Jail Day. That might just be a Canada holiday though. Do you have that where you are? And I've spent most of my adult life pretending to be an adult. I'm getting pretty good at it. When I'm out in public, most people wouldn't even know that I'm actually an 8-year-old boy on the inside. Until I whip out my Miu Mini, of course. Then they notice, but by that point, they're too busy being super jealous of my burger time skills to care. Us retro gamers are all too familiar with pretending. We love playing retro games on dusty old CRTs or original console hardware to make us feel like we're back in the 80s and 90s. We buy retro emulation doodads that look like old Game Boys or Super Nintendos because it makes us feel like these are fun old things instead of cheap modern e-waste. And we play old games to pretend that we prefer the nostalgia, rather than admitting that we just suck at Fortnite, which is obviously what we'd rather be playing. And games themselves are an escape, a chance to live a second life. And gamers' brains are hardwired to suspend our disbelief and pretend that we're axe-wielding barbarians, or angsty high school kids, or future sci-fi space soldiers, or monkeys who wear ties and ride rhinoceroses. If you play games, you pretend stuff all the time. So I don't want to hear any, but why would you want to pretend that games are different than they are? Comments when I tell you that today we're gonna do that. We're here to make retro games feel like they were from entirely different platforms. I'm talking Game Boy Advance games that are actually old DOS games, or Super Nintendo games that are actually high-res modern indie games, or PS1 games that are actually monochrome low-res Game Boy games. Why would anyone want to do this? Well, because the alternative is acting normal. And I've spent years carefully building a brand around not doing that. Before I show you this and how to do it, let's go over what you actually need to do this yourself. Because watching me do it is fun to do while you wash the dishes or poop or whatever, but this is definitely the kind of thing you need to see for yourself, to experience how different games can feel just by changing the visual style, so your brain can be tricked into believing that Tony Hawk's could actually run on a Game Boy. And for this, the only thing you need is a doodad, like a handheld or a computer or whatever, that runs RetroArch and has shader support. So your Linux handhelds like the Amberlix XX devices and a bunch of others. And basically every Android handheld like the RG476H or the Retroid Pocket thing or the Odin whatever, or a Raspberry Pi running Batocera, or a computer running RetroArch. All those will work fine. The only devices that this won't work on is lower powered stuff that doesn't support shaders. For example, one of my favorite handhelds ever, the Miu Mini Plus, this thing has no shader support. It has filters so you can sort of do a bit of this, but I'm not going to cover that. The handheld that I'm going to be using to show you all this stuff is my current favorite Android handheld for retro games, the Amberlix RG476H. I'll include a link to my review and where you can get this in the thingy below if you're looking to pick one of these up. I use this in the video and to record the full screen gameplay footage. We'll get into all sorts of different effects and stuff in a minute, but first I need to show you how this actually works. And to do that, I'm actually going to show you right off the start my favorite shader combo in the video. This turns pretty much any game into a Game Boy game. Arcade games, Super Nintendo games, PS1 games, doesn't matter. We're going to drag them into 1989 and make them live there. If that sounds appealing to you, congratulations. You're exactly the kind of person that this video is made for. Load up any game in RetroArch and get to an actual gameplay screen. Not the title screen, not the options menu, the game. And then open the RetroArch menu and head into the quick menu, shaders, and then turn shaders on if they're disabled. So shaders are basically graphical layers that change how a game looks. The fun part is that you can stack multiple shaders together, like an unholy emulation lasagna. First, go to Load Preset. You'll see two folders here. GLSL, and slang. This depends on your video settings, but on Android, GLSL is usually the right answer. If you open one and you don't see any shaders inside the folders, just go back and try the other one. Let's head into the MISC folder and load simple color controls. We're going to need that later. Now back out and choose append preset. Append just means put another shader on top. Now we're going to go into interpolation and load half res. As the name suggests, it cuts the resolution in half. Look at that, it's already getting crunchy. Noise. Next, we're going to head into append preset again, then handheld, and select GB palette. Boom. Game Boy colors. One more. Back to append preset, then handheld, and pick Same Boy LCD. And now we've got the full Game Boy experience, including one authentic feature from the original hardware. You can't see anything. That's why we loaded the simple color controls preset earlier. While the game is visible behind the menu so you can see what's going on, head into the shader parameters and increase the brightness. You can also use bright boost if needed. You can see what's happening in the background, but you might need to go back and forth from your game to dial it in. Just fiddle with it until it looks good. And by looks good, I mean looks bad, but like on purpose. Once you're happy with it, we're going to save the preset. Now, you can save this as a core preset if you want every game on this system to use it automatically, but personally, I don't always want all my PS1 games looking like this. I'm not a psychopath. Instead, let's choose Save Preset As and give it a name. Now, anytime you want, you can load that preset and instantly transform any game with these exact shader choices. You see what I'm saying? Look at that. Different system, different game, still a Game Boy. The text can get pretty rough with the half resolution shader, so feel free to make a version without it. I won't be doing that though, because I'm not here to make good decisions. And now that you know the technical stuff, we can move on to the fun part. All the bizarre, unnecessary, and occasionally questionable things that we can do to perfectly innocent video games using this torture method. Let's begin with a very simple thing that I like to do often. Change the color of my retro games. I don't mean like applying a whole Game Boy palette to a PS1 game, only a moron would actually do something like that. I mean to apply a subtle color change to a game to help it feel different. Because here's the thing about lots of retro games. Lots of what makes them feel dated isn't the graphics or effects or whatever, it's actually the colors that are used. I find especially with much older games like NES and Sega Master System, these games use super bright, super saturated colors, which is fine for some types of games, but some games I feel aren't the kinds of games that should have super bright in-your-face colors. Like RPGs or whatever, I feel like those kind of games should just be more subtle. For this, it's super simple. I apply a shader from the handheld shader set called Palm Color. You can also get a similar but slightly different effect with NDS Color or even GBC Color. These color schemes are meant to tone down handheld systems that had purposefully oversaturated colors at the code level because the screens of these systems were kinda undersaturated. But this shader actually works great for toning down older console retro games too. If you're playing an old game and you're thinking that maybe the super oversaturated primary colors aren't hitting the right vibe, give this one a go to tone them down. Real quick, this is a weird one, but it's also kind of crazy at how well this tricks my brain into thinking I'm watching like a recording of a game on an actual old TV. My brain is pretty easily tricked though, so that checks out. The idea here is that you're going to use shaders that mimic the look of recorded footage, like old Technicolor or VHS style video. Why would you actually want this? Because shut up, that's why. It's neat, and we can do it, so we're doing it. That's all you need to know. But in addition to shutting up, please consider clicking the subscribe button. I'm almost at 300,000 subscribers, and I would be super grateful if you'd help me get there. Thanks, buddy. So there are two different shaders that work well for this. There's one called Technicolor, which is an old filming method that was used in some early color films like Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind. I don't think this actually looks like Technicolor video, however, it really does look VCR-ish to me. The other one is NTSC Mini. NTSC is the North American and Japanese television standard, and this doesn't just mimic the colors, but also the actual rendering. This also feels very VHS to me. There are actual VHS style shaders that you can use, but I feel like they're all a bit over the top. I find these Technicolor and NTSC shaders are plenty to capture this vibe. This next one is kind of weird, but this is something that I actually do, like on the regular. The idea is that we use shaders to transform old handheld games in a way that makes them look like old console games, or even like old DOS games kind of thing. I do this all the time on my emulation PC and also on my arcade machine. Like, I have my Game Boy games looking like they're running on an old CRT monitor. I don't know why, just there's some caveman part of my brain that loves Game Boy games on my arcade machine like this. I don't argue with that part. I just give it what it wants and hope that it doesn't make me punch myself again. There's nothing too fancy here. Really, you just apply a CRT shader to your handheld games and call it a day. My favorite shader for this specifically is called Fake CRT Geom Potato. It's a lightweight shader, so it should work fine even on lower powered handhelds. It has scan lines and the curvature effect, which I do like on my CRT shaders. And it's got a little bit of like dark vignetting around the edges. You could go with like whatever shader you like a simple scanline shader, but I feel like this gets the point across better with the full CRT effect. This is great on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Neo Geo Pocket, Game Gear, and even Game Boy Advance. It is absolutely not the way that these games were ever intended to be played, but that's kind of the point. My eyes see this and my brain goes, oh neat, this is like an old DOS game that never existed. Or, oh wow, I never knew Advance Wars 2 was also on the Super Nintendo. And that makes me happy, tricking my own brain. It's easy and fun. On the flip side, what about this? Making an old console game feel like it's running on an old LCD handheld. What about it? Huh? Nothing too revolutionary here. Just slap on an LCD shader onto your console games and you too can play the handheld port of the best console retro games that the world never got. The shader I actually like for handheld games is the dot shader. However, for turning old console games into handheld games, I like something a bit less clean. LCD Grid V2 Motion Blur is the one that I suggest for this. It's got a nice obvious effect, but it's not too like bold with the LCD pixels, so it doesn't look bad when you use it on higher resolution systems. And it's got a subtle motion blur like old handhelds, which makes the games have the handheld screen type of motion too. If you ever wondered what games from a true, proper NES handheld would have looked like, then this is your chance. Next up, I wanted to touch on a type of shader that's pretty popular, which I'm going to call cartoony shaders. I think you could also say that these are sort of like upscaling, but you could also not say that too if you didn't want to. The idea here is that these shaders will attempt to smooth out and then sharpen the pixel image to make it look like the art was made at a higher resolution than it was. I remember back in high school, in the early days of emulation, this was like, this was such a revolutionary thing. Think of this as like a visual overhaul to your games to make them look like higher res indie games or something, rather than the charming pixel-based retro games that they are. Now, I don't like this. It's pretty gross to me. I'd much rather see the actual pixels. However, I realize that some people like them, and I'm not here to tell you what to like other than me. You need to like me. That's not optional. Let me know how much you like me in the comments below. For this, there's actually a whole bunch of ones to pick from. I'll put a list to some of the ones I found that looked okay on the screen, pick whichever you like, but the one that I picked as my personal favorite is called Cut 3. This one actually has a kind of neat look to it, the way that it squishes down and then sharpens the pixels. It has a cartoon effect, but it also has a neat style to it. I would never choose to play like this, but if you would, then I guess I'll allow it. The final strange thing that I want to share is what I'm calling make it look like it's running on an old computer mode. And you'll never guess what it does. This is about making any game look like it's running on an old computer. You know, like an old Amstrad CPC or even an old IBM Monochrome Hercules graphics PC or something. There are 3 shaders you're going to want for this, and we're going to apply them in the same way I showed you earlier in the video, one at a time, kind of stacked on top of each other. The first one we need is that good old simple color controls. Add that, and then go to a pen preset, and then we're going to add a dither filter called Gen Dither. And finally, this part is optional. Actually, this entire video is optional, to be honest. But finally, let's add a CRT filter. Same one as before, Fake CRT Geom Potato. Now, before we get in playing, let's change the colors. Head into the shader parameters, and in here, go to Lum Fix and set this to 2. This is the CPC color space, which crunches the colors down to a limited 27 color palette, I think, just like the Amstrad CPC. And this is what it looks like. But what about old monochrome monitors like the amber screen on my old IBM Hercules PC? Or maybe all green like a Pip-Boy? Well, for this, we're going to start with a different color shader called Color Mangler. Great name. Then we apply the Gen Dither shader, and then we apply Fake CRT Geom Potato. Now, when we go into the shader parameters, we're going to set the saturation down to 0, and then set red to 2, set green to 1, and blue to 0. That'll give us the yellowish amber display like an old Hercules PC. If you want this to be green like a Pip-Boy style, do the same thing but set red to 0.6, set green to 2, and set blue to 0. Don't forget you can also save these as individual shader presets so you don't have to do this every time. And also, make sure you try these on different systems. Hercules graphics for NES games is cool and stuff, but what about Neo Geo games? Or PS1 games? What about those, huh? No, seriously, what about them? I need to know if this is good. I can't even tell anymore. And now it's your turn. I've shown you some bonkers, nonsensical ways to turn your games from one system into another, but now I want to hear what sort of mad concoctions you can come up with. I bet a smart dweeb like you has all sorts of crazy ideas. Something super weird and unique that I had no hope of ever coming up with. Let's see what you got in the comments below. And while you're down there, you might as well, click the thumbs up button and the subscribe button, notification button, whatever other buttons you see, just click all the buttons. I'm sure it's fine. That's it from me for today. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.